Good evening and welcome to Inside the Rookery Season 10, Episode 4, episode number 161, where we are welcoming back Vera Similia. Well, we're not welcoming you back to Inside the Rookery, but we've been on other streams together before, so I feel like I'm welcoming you back, even though this is the first time you're coming on ItR. Hopefully, we've got Andy Law. Yeah, Andy's here, and welcome to anyone who is raiding us from the Lawhammer Ask Me Anything. I am really hoping that we don't have any of the audio issues that Andy has been plagued with for the past hour, causing me to dash on a mercy mission from the shower through the garden to advise him that he had issues. So welcome, Vera. Hello.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
We are also excited to have you here. We've got loads of questions pre-submitted as always by our patrons on our friendly Discord community. I think we'll struggle to get through them, but even so, we'll just save them for another time if we don't. And if you have any questions or comments, as always, pop them in the chat and I will bring them up on screen and you can ask Vera questions as we go along. But before we get into those, I'm going to hand over to Vera to introduce herself and talk a little bit about her background and what we're talking about today.
Yeah, hi, I'm Vera. You may be familiar with me through my writing for Warhammer. I work on the 4th edition RPG as well as the Old World RPG. I am a contributor to a handful of books over the last few years, a few more to come. Beyond that, I stream things here on Twitch, WoW, and YouTube. I work on video games like Open Fortress. I work on cartoons like Love Web, internet productions, and so on, and I have a good time doing it. So I am a sort of career writer. I have a lot of thoughts about writing. I was an English major in college where I took various humanities courses that also informed my thoughts of how to write and how to approach different topics and realism and making things feel right in writing. So I'm quite excited to discuss these today. Yes.
Apparently, my audio is a little iffy.
You're a little bit dodge. I can hear you, and hopefully you can hear me because my audio has also been dodged today.
Yeah, we're having a little bit of a time
You're
today.
just a bit mumbly.
It's my iPad microphone. For some reason, it's not swapping to my headphone microphone, so I'll just maybe lean in a little bit, and hopefully that'll just bring me close. So Grail mic, tell me if that makes it better.
It's fine. There's not much difference between the two. I would just press on and not worry about it.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, hopefully I won't talk that much anyway. So
yeah,
let us.
Suck.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Thanks. Did you get my message on Discord, Andy? Go and look at it.
I got a lot of messages in Discord.
So today we're going to be talking about realism in TTRPG writing, and to open us up, I thought I would go with Smiling Tom's question, which is realism just a way of expressing internal cohesion?
So I would be inclined to say not necessarily. Like realism sort of has its roots as an artistic movement, right? As a response to romanticism. And more than internal cohesion, it's about avoiding idealization and about depicting things in a way that does make sense, that does have internal cohesion, of course, but there are multiple facets that you can approach the concept of realism from, right? We're going to get into this a little bit more when we talk about the concept of what verisimilitude really is, but you can look at realism as things feel like they could happen next door to you, like they could happen outside. You could look at realism as things feel like they make sense in that setting and have that internal cohesion, but the way it's applied depends a little bit depending on the medium, right? Like sometimes when things have like perfect internal cohesion, it can make them feel less real even. There's an interesting example of this in John Woo's films in Hong Kong cinema, wherein if the impact sounds and fight scenes map to what they should be in the setting, it feels less real because it sounds as if nothing is happening at all. It becomes realer than real, even though that doesn't really make sense given the way the Foley works and how things should work in the scene. So it's more about feeling right? That's what's really going on with realism.
Yeah. So we'll go into Martine's question because you mentioned that, and then I'll take the question from the chat. So Martine asks, so what is verisimilitude really? I keep on saying that.
Well, verisimilitude, its core definition is basically when things have the appearance of being true or real, and you can apply this in a number of ways. For example, the two different facets of realism we've just discussed, things can have verisimilitude, and they feel like they could have happened to your neighbor. They could happen outside right now. They can have that kind of internal cohesion where they make sense in their realm, or alternatively, they can have verisimilitude as a truth value. This shows up in philosophy sometimes. A statement can have a certain amount of verisimilitude. It is as close to reality or as far from reality as it is assigned. So verisimilitude can be used in different ways, but at its core, it's about how right something feels, how true it feels, even if you know it is not.
Yeah, Mornington Crescent says, just to go back to your Hollywood and computer games and media generally have conditioned us to believe things should act in a certain way. Armor, for example, is useless against a stick. I would be interested to know, the Foley sounds. I would be interested to know how much of it is that we think they're not realistic because we've been conditioned over the years to associate the way Foley artists made sounds with what it sounds like in a cinema versus like if they had just done it realistically the whole time, would we accept that, or would it always just sound like flat and not real enough for us?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because you have like whole schools of cinema, like cinema verite, which is like very much founded on hyper realistic, as depicting reality as possible, camera movements and motions that I think are found quite dull by most people. But there is something to be said for the primacy of the trope and how people think about certain things, especially in action media, right? I think that conditioning has sort of seized the public consciousness just through how separate most people are from the reality of wearing armor and firing guns and so on. And also because, well, if we were quite accurate with how much strain people can handle in action scenes, a lot of movies would be quite short and quite boring because there's only so much abuse that people can handle, right?
Yeah, Andy Law's favorite thing to do when he's watching films is turn to me or TV shows every time something like that happens and say, well, they're dead. Well, they're dead.
Yep. Or if not, they're out of action for a good few weeks, right? They're no longer going to be doing things, running around, doing action scenes.
Yeah, you've just suffered a critical hit to the head. I think it's also worth noting, to speak to what Lindsay was saying there directly, over time, cultural differences have sort of taken on other cultures' ideas of what is and what isn't acceptable. If we take a look at, for example, of the movies from the 70s and 80s and 90s coming out of Hong Kong, with their high impact whacking noises and thump, 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 and so much heavy sounds that sounded then ridiculous because we were sunk into almost Hollywood's 1970s realism. And when we were seeing the high impact movies coming out of, China, it wasn't really China, it was Hong Kong then, they were ridiculous. And if we take a look at what Bollywood was doing, which was sort of a bridge between both Hollywood's side and what was happening in the East, it was both this over-the-top version and also a more realistic version running together, but it still felt to our ears ridiculous. If we take a look at movies nowadays, though, particularly as we move through the high-impact late 80s movies into the 90s, when their action got more and more testosterone-filled, more and more ridiculous, and then we move into the noughties and superhero movies where everything just got pitched up. Now when you go back to those older movies from the 80s from Hong Kong, they don't look as daft. They don't sound as strange because time over the course of our experiences through the different movies and where they have led us, as we moved out of the Western genre being the primary genre into the superhero genre being the primary genre that we're all engaged with, our acceptance of what is real has completely changed. And those real experiences that we get on movies look weird, sound odd, because they don't have the high impacts that we're used to from our Netflix or Amazon fueled action movie where some muscle-bound person quips a couple of times, hits someone with a mighty thump and has not a bruise on his fist.
So here's a question from the chat from Grey Lotus. Any recommended writing advice for overcoming design hurdles? I find myself constantly going back and rewriting things I was otherwise happy with beforehand and can't find a stopping point.
So design hurdles is a little vague, but
yeah,
the reality is you can write something in a lot of ways that will be successful and will work in your setting. Editing is important. Editing is where good work comes to life, but it's possible to over-edit. One thing that can help if you're revising the same section over and over is to look at your outline for the rest of the work and see how it all fits together, because you want a good balance with your design. You want to hit all the notes you want to for your setting. You want to make sure your tone comes through strongly. You want to make sure that you hit all the themes that you want with each character, with each scenario. And you can edit something to death. You can sit on the same section and work at it for ages and ages and ages and redo it and revise it as much as you like. And all of these could be serviceable in different ways and do different things. If you're otherwise happy with it beforehand, maybe you can revise it later. Maybe it's a good process to work at other things, even like if you're not entirely sure how you want it to play that section of your design, and return to it later where you could hold it in conjunction with other parts of your work.
Yeah, maybe limit yourself to a first draft and then 2 editing passes, but don't let yourself constantly go back, re-edit section, re-edit another section, then read the whole thing, then re-edit sections 3 and 4.
Yeah,
like,
I have some pretty strong advice here. I have some pretty strong advice here, and that's do shit, move on.
Yep.
Do shit, move on. Do shit, move on.
Yep.
Trust me, most of my older stuff, when I look at it, I'm like, what the fuck was I thinking? But I think that about most of my work anyway. But every once in a while, I go back to something that I may have edited, and I look at it and go, holy shit, that was good. I really nailed that. Fuck me, that was a really, really succinct, concise, and characterful description. I freaking love it. So there is nothing wrong with not liking what you have, but there is probably a lot that could be said about re-editing, worrying, and re-editing. And I find that most of the different writers I've experienced have lots of different opinions here. Some of them actually like to go back, re-edit, do their thing. That's their process. It's how they like to go. Some prefer to have a few days, do something else, come back, have a cup of tea, whatever, and then with fresh eyes come back to their work and do a second pass, a third pass, a fourth pass. Some do far too many. Me, I have learned that what works best for me is just move on. There's not enough time in your life to worry about the precise wording of that sentence for the 9th time. If you've spent your headspace on it twice already, you've probably done enough. Everyone's going to understand it. Go try and read, go try and write something else, do something to extend your skills rather than worry over the detail.
Lore Master of Sotek's asking if you can boost your mic a bit, Andy. It's not letting me do it.
I've already tried.
Okay.
I don't know if it's made much of a difference at your end, and apologies
Maybe
if I'm
just
quiet.
move your mic closer to your face at this
How's
point.
that? Oh, hello. Does
Worse.
that make any difference at all?
No. Okay, so Suejin asks, what are some books, TV series, or other media that have inspired you, and how have you used them?
Ooh, that is a broad question, and I could probably talk about that for a little while.
Let's go for one book, one TV series, and one other media that really clicked with you, and limit it to that then. Sure.
So book-wise, this is more of a series. The Witcher novels by Andrzej Sapkowski are, I think, very interesting. They are close to the ground in a very cool way. I like the way they build out their worlds. I really like the structure and style. I think that the short story structure and the earlier Witcher collections is really cool. Really does a great job of fleshing out the environments they're in. I think the way that they play with folklore in these stories is amazing, very interesting. TV series, recently I have been very into a puppet show called Thunderbolt Fantasy, which is by Gen Urabuchi, behind many well-known works. He was involved in Fate, Madoka Magica, if you're familiar. Very cool. It's like sort of a wuxia production. It's made from a collaborative team between Japan and Taiwan. Strong recommendation. And then other media. I think one of my early influences was the Knights of the Old Republic video games by BioWare. I thought those were really fascinating as a young kid. They were one of my ins to tabletop in general, because I realized midway through they were based in this D20 system. What's that? And then, boy, did I learn. But the way they handled characterization in that, the branching pathways, it sort of opened my mind as to what media could be, the options that were possible in a role-playing scenario and what that could mean. And these have inspired me in various ways. Like The Witcher informed my thoughts on characterization, on world building very much, about how much you need to say to get a strong idea of what your setting is about. Thunderbolt Fantasy is extraordinarily cool, and one of the characters there sort of has gone to really strongly inform how I think about war dancers, one of my favorite parts of the Warhammer setting. And then KOTOR is just excellent. Like, that was a big shaper of my thoughts about good and evil, and how you can portray those in a game. Where the gray lies, especially in KOTOR 2, moral ambiguity, as they say, because they challenge a lot of your decisions in ways that are quite intelligent for a Star Wars story, especially, which is quite black and white in the mainline films, I would say. So.
Yeah, I strongly recommend both KOTOR and KOTOR 2 for very different reasons.
Yes.
One for almost the bombastic, woohoo, let's go adventure, Star Wars, woo! And the other one where Star Wars, yeah, let's have a little discussion about what the Force is, and deep dive time, you're not gonna like it. So yeah, that's fun. Good choice.
Thank you.
Yeah, like that one.
So Smiling Tom asks, when developing a setting, is it important to set the framework in advance, or just start with a premise and develop it from there as the story advances?
So when developing a setting, I think it's important to have clarity, and what you have clarity on isn't necessarily the most important thing. I think that having guiding principles behind your design will let you shape things in a way that's perhaps flexible. For my part, when I start a setting, I begin with what I think of as the core ideas that are important to get across, and how I want to show different facets of those ideas through the writing. So premise isn't necessarily the one you have to start with, I would say. You could start with theme, you could start with like core concept, you can start with aesthetic perhaps, and let those shape the sorts of characters that should populate that. Maybe if you are interested in the grotesque, you can come up with different facets of your reality that let you highlight that in ways you're interested in, right? Maybe if you're interested in political drama, you can take your research to real world political happenstance and use that to build out factions and characters that have strong motivations. Developing as you go is important, but you want to have like your anchor points for what's really important to you in your setting, and use that to guide wherever else you go.
I couldn't support that enough. In fact, I strongly recommend, whether you're doing your own creation of worlds, whether you're doing art direction, whether you're doing production for a game line, whatever it might be, to strongly understand what the core themes, motifs, the core elements are of whatever it is that you're putting together. In many respects, it's more important than what the story is itself, because it will inform every step of the story as you're putting it together. And it allows you to constantly reevaluate what you're creating, going, have I remembered to include what I'm actually here to talk about? What is it that I'm here to discuss? Is my world about betrayal? About duplicity? Is my world about honor and courage and how that is bullshit? Whatever it is that works for your world, your setting, needs to be written out in the simplest of ways. And this should also be done for the art, where you can very clearly put the color that is most important. You can very clearly mark the motifs that represent the core motivation behind the writing. And it's simple. It's really easy. And you want to know how many projects I've been on that just let the writers go wherever they want? All of them. All of them. Because often the developers forget that they're creating an overall cohesive piece. Yeah. And it's something that not only helps individual writers get in the right place and ensure that their headspace is hopefully going in the same direction as everyone else if you're on a creative piece that multiple people are working towards, but it also allows them to remember how to build what they're building, because they can go, have I done this? Have I done this? Have I done that? And it gives them a handy framework, which is often not more than 6, 7, 8 words, but what a powerful set of words they can be.
Mm-hmm. I think when you're editing or when you're developing and you've set the clear tone for the world, the game line, whatever, it was really helpful, because it moves your editing from just, grammatical checking to actually being able to think, right, how do I, whenever I get this work back, what can I do to make it more insert game line here.
Yep.
Yeah. Right. Next one. So this is more about the characters themselves. So Zoltan asks, do you use any methods or frameworks like the 5-room backstory, Enneagram types, or writing prompts when helping others flesh out their characters, or presumably when creating NPCs yourself?
Yeah, I like to use questions. I like doing it kind of interview style. I'm very fond of this, of giving specific lists of questions that I think are generative and reveal things about the character's personality, and letting that kind of guide how they're fleshed out, because a well-developed character should be able to talk about themselves, and that should lead itself to good conversations. And I think that is the most flexible a lot of the time. Full writing prompts are a little much for a lot of things at the table, I find. You'll have players who are unwilling or unable to produce 5 pages of discussion about their character, perhaps. But if you can get them in that headspace where they're able to, off the cuff, think about and then answer questions about who their character is, what they want, where they've come from, what they're afraid of, then you have a pretty well-developed person that starts to feel real.
Yeah, and it also not only provides you with the potentially useful information for bringing reality to that character, in some respects it also gives you a little bit of practice thinking of what that character thinks in their head. It gives you those first steps towards role-playing that character. I cannot, again, it's almost like we're working in sabbatical here, I cannot agree with this more. This is 100% something that I do a lot. Questions are core to allowing people understand, because they have to come up with answers, and through the process of coming up with answers and then discussing those answers and how they could possibly go in different directions, you begin to create something that feels real, even though you might be dealing with something that is, in truth, deeply fantasy. But it begins to feel real because you have to justify your choices. Rather than just stating them, you are answering and providing extra detail for the character at hand.
Yeah, I feel like in the WFRP, I'm just looking at the WFRP core rulebook just now, the 10 questions.
Yeah, it's got the 10 questions.
There, page 42, 43, where are you from? What's your family like? What was your childhood like? I find sometimes we've made a lot of characters for either just for fun, for rolling them up, for side streams for Lawhammer, for the main quest for Lawhammer, for our own games that are not streamed. And sometimes what I find is, like, Andy will ask me these, and you sort of put a pin in one. So why did you leave home is like question 4. I maybe don't know why she or he left home until I go down to whom or what are you loyal. So I find myself jumping about between the questions, and as I get a spark on one of the questions, it makes me go, and that could be why. Go back to an earlier question and fill it out a little bit more. So if you're ever doing that on paper, leave like big chunks, and you can always just put in a little, like, one sentence, but a note. You'll come back to that when you've answered a few more. But the Warhammer 10 questions are a good set of questions to start with for a game like that. We've lost Vera.
I think she's still there to be heard.
My neck's broken a little bit. Excuse me. These things happen. Technology's scary. It's healed. I couldn't agree more, though. It's good to be flexible with these. It gets you in the space of the character, which is really important.
Yeah, and a call out to Chris Pramus from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition for the 10 questions. He wrote the first version of that, as I recall, and the updated version of that was based upon his original work, again, as I recall.
Yeah, so there's a question in chat that's actually similar to one on Discord, so I'll bring this one up and then bring the Discord one up. So I think Ben asks, I think distinctiveness of characters and making them believable can be in conflict. How do we make legible characters without stereotype that lack verisimilitude? And let me try and find it. So Zoltan asks, when you write for established IPs like WFRP or the Old World, how much freedom do you have to add realistic human nuance to otherwise archetypical characters? Maybe start with this because it's a question about writing, and then we'll go back to
this one's easier too.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the answer to this is quite a lot, actually. But I have never felt like penned into some archetype that I've been assigned. When you're writing a character, you're writing a person. They have nuance. Every character should have nuance. And the opportunity you have when writing in a setting like Warhammer, where you're writing perhaps a character that would be a unit on the tabletop, is to find a person that fits into this career. And you can do this in a pretty much any realm of writing. Like you could write a goblin this way. You could write a dark elf this way. Even like monstrous characters, perhaps like troll, you give some kind of personality that gives them a little bit of nuance. I think that it's an open field. I think that that nuance is what makes them feel like they belong in that archetype. Because if you have this blank slate that's just a stat block, then they don't feel like a character at all.
Yeah.
And I will agree. The freedom is significant on almost everything that I've worked on. One of the points in many respects of hiring out freelancers is to get lots of different views that you as the owner of the IP or the developer of the IP might not have or might not just be aware of. One of the great joys of bringing in different types of people is that they bring different voices, different experiences, and different nuance than you yourself might add. And often the development between two different people, three different people, or a group of people ends up with characters that are much deeper. And I have never found, working on a license or an IP, that character nuance and development has ever been an issue.
Yeah,
Ever.
and I think that that's actually the answer to, one answer to Ben's question, and that is, how do you make legible characters without stereotype? Is that often when you're writing characters, you're not doing it in isolation. So you're seeking other opinions. You've maybe got an editor, you've also got a proofreader, you've got other developers, you've got other writers, and they will, like, if something jumps off the page, and WFRP is a delicate balance, right? Because there's a lot of like nods to pop culture, but you don't want to just like take a character, lift it and drop it. It has to be like Warhammerized. And if you do that and someone's like, oh, that's just such and such, then you kind of know you've done it wrong. It doesn't have a WFRP like je ne sais quoi. It needs something more. But that's the same in writing for any line. You have to create something that's interesting, unique, but also touches on what people understand that people are like. Because people, like, there's a reason we have stereotypes, because people are like those stereotypes sometimes.
To that end, I would say the worst. I obviously there's like a bad way to do things. I think one of the worst ways to write a character is to start with TV tropes and work backwards. Please don't do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it also shows when you do.
Yeah.
There's a question about that we'll hopefully get to in the Discord, about how do you take tropes and actually make them work. This is Grail Mike's mandatory Horus Heresy question. On a scale of real to istic, how realistic is the Horus Heresy? I'd say it's decently realistic. Well, you would. Biased opinion incoming. I'd say it's the most realistic Warhammer setting.
I have a lot of issues with parts of the Horus Heresy, and I personally do not find it the most realistic Warhammer setting.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost on the scale of the Greek gods, right? Like it's this familial conflict. It's very bombastic, and the consequences are galactic. It is a heck of a thing.
Yeah. So Zoltan asks, and this is a question I was thinking of, how do you avoid creating characters that are just a collection of tropes or gimmicks? I mean, I guess, Vera, you gave one answer, which is don't start with a trope.
The more you inform your characterization by thinking about like who this is as a person and why they are the way they are, the better, I think, for this in particular. A lot of characters that turn out not so fun at the table are like that because their character's developer has started with what that character has accomplished, all the things they've done, all these in the abstract experiences they've had that make them cool. And in practice, that says very little about the person that they are. Like, there are very few bad premises, very few bad ideas. I like to say this, like back to like how you make the premise come across. There's any premise you can use. You can do anything as long as it's written well, as long as it's conveyed well, as long as it's tonally appropriate and brought forward in a way that is useful and effective and interesting. And a lot of that starts with like, who this person is and why they are the way that they are. And if you know those things, you start to understand why they might exemplify certain tropes. Like if you come to something that's kind of a trope, naturally, there is a reason you've played into this archetype, and it's going to feel natural. It's going to feel right.
Yeah. Hard agree. So I don't have the great fear of characters that appear like collections of tropes or perhaps are gimmicky if the character fucking rocks. If the character's a character. And I think that is ultimately where it belongs. And the answer to that is why, not what did they do, but why did they do it? And the various answers to the whys suddenly turn into something that feels real. And it's one of those ones where I'd say that BioWare often do very well, where they take what appears to be a stereotypical character and you meet them and they go, I'm a walking stereotype. And you go, well, this is a walking stereotype. And you speak to them again and they say, holy shit, this was hard. Crap. And you begin to realize that often behind the scenes, they're projecting, or there's a reason why they're a walking stereotype, or something happened in their past which made them become what they are today. And suddenly that walking stereotype becomes less of one. And you go, oh, there's more to it, where they're using the stereotypes to effectively go, look, he's obviously the rogue. Okay, he's obviously the big muscle. And then they add extra detail by showing that the characters are much more than the tropes that they apparently manifest. And I think that's something that is definitely always worth doing. There's nothing wrong with having a collection of tropes. I don't think it's a bad thing. I do think it's a bad thing, though, if it's the sole reason that they exist and all they exist for.
Zoltan asks, what are some underrated emotional traits or flaws that help make TTRPG characters feel more believable and relatable?
Well, that's a toughie.
I think one of the truest answers for this, if you want believable and relatable, is to draw from your own experience, things that have challenged you in the past, and to exaggerate those or place those in a different context. If you want a shortcut to making a character believable and relatable, you can pull from your own concerns and anxieties. And you don't want to make a clone of yourself necessarily, but if you draw on your own history of emotion and the experiences you've had in your youth and scenarios you've been in that you found challenging, you can use those to map out a character that oftentimes will feel very believable. And doing that can give you practice in bringing forward other challenges and traits in ways that come across as realistic. It gets... Yeah, I wouldn't say there's underrated flaws necessarily. I think that it depends on the kind of character and what kind of flaws they might have. But if it comes down to believability, whatever you can confidently draw on the emotional spectrum of might lead you there.
Yeah, I think like D&D for me doesn't do this wrong. I wouldn't say something does it wrong, but I think when you look at D&D and you look at the archetypes in D&D, because they're tied to like attributes, they automatically seem to have character traits that go along with what are essentially professions. And I quite like to look at, when you're creating characters, think about like, well, how could they not be like that? Like the bard is not the charming one, like the barbarian's not the gruff one. Like flip some of those things round, and that makes them feel more believable, because real people aren't informed by their like what you're doing in the party.
Yeah, okay, I've got one. And this is one that particularly bugs me. So yeah, I'm going to dive in it. Role-playing is often wish fulfillment in an unexpected way. You are often playing characters that are idealized versions of people. They're not very real. And by this, I mean, they will face down the large monster. They will show absolutely no fear before the king. They will show no issue where normal people might be awed, might be fearful, might lack confidence. Now, they are protagonists. So they are often the characters that you almost archetypically expect to be the ones that do the shit. But real people, real protagonists, who talk about the difficulties that they face at every single step of the way. Yeah. The person who looks like they are doing their 50th big speech in front of crowds of thousands and has no problems was sick 5 minutes before. Yeah. There is this weird thing with roleplay where there is this I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm just doing it. I'm not afraid of this. I'm just going ahead because we get into this idealized version of the perfect outcome. And this perfect outcome is something that a lot of people do. Their first thought is not generally, how would I feel in this situation as a character? It's often, what am I going to do next? And feelings take a second point. So I'd say the most underrated emotional traits and flaws are people actually being afraid without having rules enforcing it upon them. Because that's generally the only time that fear and terror hits roleplay games, when you have it impinged upon you from the outside, or if you're playing an indie game that says, ooh, fear, terror. And that's actually the point of the game. Ooh. But that is not the core roleplay experience that most people are engaged with, where it tends to be a big world, a big setting, playing games within that, and they're all sort of chasing their idealized heroes, forgetting that they're real people.
Yeah, it's why I want to do a self-help book that's like all about bringing like the energy of RPGs into real life. Like, you've got something at work you need to do. You've got to do some networking. Bring in the bard energy. You've got to have a negotiation session. Like, bring in the hard-nosed cleric who worships the god of money. Like, I think it would be amazing.
Yeah, like part of a good tabletop character is that they're there to go on the adventure, right? This is like one of the core like advice, like someone who wants to do it. But I think the greatest gift you can often give your DM, especially as a character who's very confident and very competent, is to show that hesitation and weakness. When the party's combat monster is freaked out by the scenario that's happening, that will hit very hard for everyone at the table.
Yeah, tells good stories.
So Tech understands when you want to slay, you go after a warrior priest of the god of sex. Slay! Slay queen. Grey Lotus, how would you recommend subtlety hinting at the potential of a newly created technology or discovered resource, but absolutely intending for it to have a major effect on your story in the future?
My go-to, naysaying and doubt. Have smear articles, have people belittling it, because that is what happens every time a paradigm shift happens. Introduce it via someone who's skeptical. It invites curiosity and it mirrors the real world.
That's it. Nailed.
There's also like that peculiar thing that when something's entrenched and is like absolutely accepted by the establishment, by science, by everything, people then become weirdly like complacency breeds like that skepticism again, so you can do it in cycles.
Flying machine will never work.
Yeah, one of our internals thinks that warrior priest, slay queen is the bard, but that's where you're wrong. Everyone just always thinks that's the bard. So we've done that one. Smiling Tom asks, how deep is just too deep? Do we really need to know how and why everything happens?
I would say you don't need to write a detailed autobiography for your character, perhaps, but inviting that kind of depth is healthy. Like, you don't need to bring everything that you can imagine about your character forward at the table, and indeed, in many cases, you cannot. There's sort of this archetypal, frustrating player experience where somebody tries to explain everything that's ever happened to their character over like a 2-hour session. You don't need to know everything in play, but it's good to have an idea of why things might have happened and to be able to answer questions if they come up in a sensible way. It's sort of a holistic thing rather than like an orthodox Rolodex of experiences your character has had.
I'm going to take a slightly different angle and say there's no bad, wrong fun. There just isn't. There's no such thing as too deep. If everyone's having fun, then it's good. And I am desperately tting not to say things that are deeply inappropriate.
I dream in character, and that's just fine. I don't need to seek help.
I am affirmatively the type to write like 30, 40 pages for characters. I have dumped these in my DM before.
And that's cool. It's not cool when it's imposed upon other people and they don't want it.
Exactly.
But when it's for you and when it's for your own enjoyment, and when it's for your benefit, how could it ever be wrong? I've had players who have zero interest in anything other than turning up and having a bit of a laugh. They answer questions and get drawn in by the stories by answering those questions and finding out who their characters are through play. But they're quite happy with just that. But I've had other players who really want to go to town, whether it's through art, whether it's through writing, whether it's poetry, whether it's through music, whatever it might be that they wish to express themselves with. And as far as I'm concerned, that is always a net positive because people are being creative. And I like that.
And
This is, sorry, Vera. This is exactly what I was talking about. You never know, maybe the bard is celibate and refrains from such things until marriage. Like just because charisma is your core statistic doesn't mean that you're a charming pickup artist. There's loads of different ways to be charismatic, and I think sometimes people forget
Hitler had high charisma.
I vomit on you.
No problem.
So I guess the short answer to this is too deep is when it starts to like run against the grain of what's happening at your table, when like it makes it harder for others to have fun. But characters can be really fun with very little preparation for them if they're inhabited well and they come across well and come across strongly. It's all about how things come out in play, what brings joy to the player, what works well in the group, etc. So there is no wrong here necessarily. Yes.
I will also say that sometimes there is you've gone too deep, man. And by that I mean,
yeah, it's just a game.
Well, no, I'm not going in that direction because it's never just a game. But sometimes you need space to discover your character because that character isn't you and is going to hopefully go in directions that you wouldn't. And if you spend a lot of time in your own head building backgrounds that you then are a slave to, and you decide, no, this is who my character is, it can often impact creativity at the table. Where, for example, an NPC comes along that we decide is part of your backstory, but I didn't write that into my backstory. That's potentially damaging. But that's more of a session zero discussion with your GM and discussing how the game will evolve and ensuring that everybody at the table understands it than it is you've gone too deep. Because as I say, there's no really any bad, wrong fun, really. But ultimately, it's all for servicing one thing, and that's people having fun when they get together. And some groups really like creativity, having a central space there and individual creativity, allowing each person's story to be directly impacted by other people's ideas. And if you've got a very fixed, trammeled view of what your character is, it can make it more difficult to engage with that type of game.
So Roderick asks, what are the particular areas of poetic license or adaptation that you add to Warhammer settings as a writer for them to increase the sense of realism?
So this came up in an interesting way when we were doing High Elves recently, because it was sort of our first on-the-ground look at Ulthuan, and there was a real effort to challenge the idealized, perfect nature of the High Elves in the setting in a way that stayed true to their emphasis on purity, their excellence, their genuine greatness, and doing that in a way that would make it feel real and lived in and allow for that gritty flavor that Warhammer is known for, and to do that without like damaging the aesthetic of the High Elves and what they are about was an interesting question. So we were really investigating ways to approach how their society deals with the specter of corruption, how they indulge, how they express themselves, the kinds of challenges and disputes that emerge. So I drew on like Buddhist ideas of overfixation on purity for this, in part because if you really lock in on this idea of perfection and being perfect and obsess over it, then you are already in the clutches of chaos. And that was one way that we sort of adapted the energy of that setting to bring across a real feeling of a high elf society. But I would say that like realism comes from imperfection, and it comes from complexity, and it comes from conflict and motivations that vary, right? It's about depth. It's about variety.
And I think like the difference between Warhammer Fantasy Battle and WFRP is in that nuance and those, like in the Fantasy Battle, it's all about broad brushstrokes. Like no other species is allowed, anywhere other than Luthern. Okay, well is that strictly true? Like does that actually happen in practice? And I think you've explored that, and so there are things that people may have known to be true about the High Elves for like multiple editions that aren't actually true. It's maybe more propaganda about the High Elves, as it turns out in the end.
Yeah, and exceptions are realistic because the
Yeah.
world is complicated, right?
And big. The world is complicated and big.
Yeah, I mean, you can see this in terms of real world application as well. There are many stereotypes, particularly if we go to countries that are not close to your own. And for example, here in the UK, we have lots of weird views of what it's like in places like Japan, China, Korea, elsewhere, because we don't visit. We deal with pure stereotype, and often it turns into very blanket, broad brushstrokes for what their community's like. And it's been really fascinating to see a lot of people's opinions of those cultures over here in the UK and presumably other Western cultures slowly but surely break apart as things like the newer Netflix shows coming out of different countries where they previously knew nothing, and suddenly they go, oh, they're just people, right? Oh, that's complicated. They're not all like this. Oh, okay. These things that I was convinced are core to Japanese culture, Korean culture, that are core to Chinese culture just aren't. People are individuals, and individuals will express in lots of different ways, and everything that seemed to be a core rule from the outside, the second you get on the inside, you realize that, yeah, they like to project that, perhaps, but in truth, it's much deeper.
Yeah, and funnily enough, we sort of answered this the wrong way round, but Martine had asked, can you provide examples of real-world influences being added to characters that help realise them efficiently? And it sounds like the Buddhist one is a good example there for the High Elves. Can you think of any examples where it hasn't worked? And I was actually going to say, like, treating other cultures that are not your culture as a monolith, and then just, like, lifting up what you understand of this monolithic culture and painting it over your elf culture or your gnome culture or, whatever game you're in. If there's non-humans, just taking a real world culture that's not yours and painting it over the non-human culture. I always find that doesn't really work. I prefer to build my non-human and any culture in a game I'm writing for, kind of from the ground up. Like, what is the physical world like where they live? What would their senses be like? How do they live? What is their society? So do it like bottom up rather than top down. Oh, they're just like the Japanese of Warhammer.
Yeah, like for High Elves, we pulled from a lot of places. We pulled from certain elements of Japanese thought. We pulled from Buddhism. We pulled from ancient Greece. We pulled from the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, and like we sort of took specific elements of philosophy from very particular places of each, and used those to kind of inform how we develop these ideas of purity, of how the society might run. And we balance that against the challenges that are faced in the setting, the ways that the world would shape this society, naval contact, how that would play out, et cetera, et cetera. So like we looked at the East India Company, we looked at all sorts of places.
Yeah, good shout. So real world influences can really help people gain access to and empathize with the setting that you're building, because they get something that allows them to go, oh, it's like that. And then suddenly you can more concisely describe what's there because their imagination fills the gaps with what they already know. It can be a very powerful tool if deployed carefully. But I think I'd like to reinforce something that Lindsay was saying. Where it hasn't worked is by making everyone human. And by making everyone human, they really, and I say they because almost all writers really don't write other species well. They end up creating humans with a different trait, short, tall, pointy-eared, whatever. And no matter how much they try and cover it up, they kind of don't, because they forget the core differences. And I think what Lindsay was suggesting is something that always has to be done. What is the difference between them and humans? And what does that mean in terms of cultural impact? And it is such a core question that everyone forgets. If you can see into infrared, light no longer means the same thing anymore. Your cities will look different because you can see all life. You can hunt at night. because you can literally see the heat making its way across the mountainside. Hunting at night is now a core component of your existence, which it isn't for humans. We always think from the human perspective where we go, nighttime is bad, daytime is good. And immediately your culture will be different if it can hear differently, see differently, sense things in a different fashion. But that just doesn't happen. And I'm going to say this almost universally. Pretty much every single setting that you see will be, this culture is humans with a tweak and it's a monoculture. So all high elves are this, and they forget that no, that's not how peoples work. Even if they're a dying species, they are not going to be like that. I hate monocultures. The idea that all of them are this, and breaking that apart, I think, with a giant hammer is something that very much needs done with Warhammer.
Yeah, complexity is realistic. Exception is realistic.
Yeah,
agreed.
absolutely.
Hard agreed. Yeah.
Here's one in the chat. So as a follow-up to my earlier question, if you wanted to bring that material from a written story and give it in-game mechanics, what steps or safety checks would you put it in place for it? I'm not sure which.
Not quite sure what that's referencing.
Oh, I can't go back far enough in the chat.
Okay,
Grey
I'll have a quick
Lotus,
check.
just yeah, thank you. Do that. Well,
Is this
I'll
it
bring
here?
up a different one. Oh, the newly created technology.
How to...
Grey Lotus, if you can explain that a bit more, we'll go on to a different one at the moment. Here's one for you, Vera. Zoltan asks, what lessons from video game writing or internet cartoons translate surprisingly well to tabletop characters?
Yeah, so when you're writing for a game or when you're writing for a cartoon, you are writing for a very small slice of time. You are trying to have efficient language usage. You want things to be sharp, to get across your point, to be tonally where you want them to be. And you have to be very deliberate with this because in a lot of scenarios, you have a very limited amount of time in your dialogue to get things across. You want to be laser focused, and this works really well at the table because if you have a really clear idea of what you want to bring across with your character in every interaction, that will get through. People will understand what your character is about. They will understand the energy that they're bringing forward, and keeping that consistent, keeping that sharp, keeping that to the point and deliberate is going to do a lot for bringing across the characterization, the essence of your character at the table.
Reinforce that. Also, people who've had background in journalism tend to do this very well as well because they're very used to having to write long, complicated ideas into short pieces that might not be longer than 300 to 500 words. And this is something you can practice. This is something you can do at home if you wish to do. Take something super complicated, write up a 300-word piece about it that everybody can understand. And then suddenly you found yourself in a good place where you're summarizing deep philosophical differences and ideas in short periods of writing. And that is core to often a lot of RPG writing as well and RPG presentation. So it's a handy skill if you've got the time to try and develop it. Try to get big ideas into short spaces.
I would say this is also part of what makes it more useful to have a very long backstory for a character, because then you can distill that.
Here's a question from Zoltan about how can players better express their characters' internal development in-game rather than through long backstories. Just as an aside, while you think about that, I think we've all been in the group where someone's so proud of their backstory that they just want to info dump it on you in session 1. Yeah. Like, hi, I'm Lindsay. Cue my entire backstory as we sit waiting for our next quest. Yeah.
So the backstory provides the starting place for development, right? It's your foundation for the starting point. Development should happen primarily, I would argue, through interactions with the rest of the party. Through character, through the influence that the people at the table have. Because I think one of the most satisfying things in a role-playing game is to feel out that evolution of those relationships and those dynamics. And it's great because it makes the other people at your table feel like they're shaping the experience that your character is having. It makes them feel connected and invested. And that way, if you have that as your guideline for internal development, it will lead to really cool role-playing scenarios. Don't hesitate to ask other characters in character about how they feel about what happened, to apologize for mistakes, to encourage them, to ask if you can help them with things, to ask about them. And you'll find they do the same in turn. And it leads to these really cool evolving relationships that will, over time, provide a lens for the experiences your character had before they got to the table.
Yeah, sum that all up with, let it happen in time, not in your backstory.
Yeah.
Okay, and use your first sessions to establish the character that you are, not the character that you want to have. And allow it to happen during play.
Yeah,
It's much more fun.
Grey Lotus's clarification was looking for advice on transferring a story idea into the game with mechanics, how to avoid making it too strong or too weak. I was looking for insight into the thought process itself.
Okay, so you're sort of asking, let's say, for example, we're living in a real world example. And you're sitting there going, how is knowledge stored and understood in my world? And then suddenly the internet is created. How do we stop that from being too powerful? How do we stop that from being too useful? And the answer is, the answer will come from what you've made and its impact. And it will come out through play. And it will come out through the course of the interactions with the players with this new technology, this new idea, this new expression. It's something that happens a lot in games, and it changes the base norm. The base normal will change. And when you know what the base normal is going to change to, you don't even need to worry too much about it being too strong or too weak, because everyone has access to it. And it's not, it's too strong and too weak. It's more, the world is undergoing change. Some people will struggle against this change. Some people will struggle to keep up with it. Some people will be on top of it and ahead of it and accepting this new change. And they will look super strong and super powerful. There are examples of this in the real world right now, where we look at what's happening with AI and how it's moving at a remarkable pace. And some people are gaining enormous benefit from this. Other people fight against it with every single last part of themselves because of what it means to their life and their chosen professions. Everyone's position is understandable for their own individual reasons. And this is exactly the same thing here. It's a new technology. It's a new magic that does things, but it's a magic with consequence. And that consequence is fun for a game side. The consequence, real world ones, is you've stolen other people's fucking work. And that's a consequence. And that, in many respects, translating over to a game can be fun too. What's the consequence of this new tech? The consequence of this new piece of information or magic, and how it deploys, and how do you end up making enemies by using it? Don't worry too much about making it strong or weak. Worry more about the story, I would suggest, that you're telling.
Yep. Quick fire question, because we've only got a few minutes left. What's your favorite tragic flaw to give a character to really bring them to life?
I am fond of Byronic characters. I enjoy when a character is their own worst enemy and the cause of their own problems. I think it is interesting. I think that it gives them great depth, and that it can be really fun at the table for the rest of the party to realize that perhaps this person is their own undoing. I think that can play out in a whole lot of different ways. I have done it in several, and it's always exciting to me when the greatest threat a character has is themselves.
Yeah, agreed. Love that.
Yeah, I think it's really funny when we've been playing Lawhammer, we've been role-playing for a long time, and there's schools of role-playing where the GM only tells you stuff that's true. So you meet characters, and those characters tell you the truth, and they give you plot hints, and they are not unreliable. They're not working on part information, because that GM runs that game almost like they treat everything as a vehicle to give GM information through. Anti-law does not do that. The world kind of runs in the background, and so we are constantly meeting characters who lie to us, who think they're telling the truth, but actually they're unreliable narrators. And I love that about NPCs. I think that's what makes characters really realistic, is that they don't do things to further the story for the PCs. They just do things because that's what that character would do. That's my favorite flaw, is that they're not gods. They don't know what the truth is.
That's interesting, because it's a common it's actually a common thing, because one of the joys of, say, Lawhammer is that you get to see a far broader reaction to the individual stories that you're telling, which would normally only be at a table with 5, 6 other people. And they will give you their reactions to what they see. And sometimes you're just left going, that guy was lying to you. For goodness sake, this is you've clearly gone in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
This is hilarious. But when you get, say, 200 people all going, yeah, but you said this earlier, so that can't be true, this new plot development. And you're like, no, that dude that said it earlier was a liar.
Yeah.
An absolute liar. And people getting over that has been surprising to me to a degree, because most people assume that everything they hear in game is kind of true. And I agree with you completely there. It's been interesting.
And then finally, are there any game systems you think absolutely nail character creation? Mornington Crescent, quite appropriately, gets the last question today.
There are a few. I do quite like Warhammer's, like the 10 questions. I think that's great. I am quite fond of Draw Steel, a upcoming game that's got a really interesting structure for building out its characters, for developing their skill sets using different toolkits. I quite like a Heart, the City Beneath's character creation. It's very appropriate for the grisly sort of setting that it runs in. And yeah, I also enjoyed Eclipse Phases. That's a very complicated design space, but I think it's quite interesting and lends itself to the setting. You can flesh out different reputation networks for your character, like where they're known and how, which I think is great fun. So it sort of depends. It depends on the kind of game it is and like how the character creation lends to tone, but there are a good few out there that I quite like. So
thank you very much. Well, that has brought us to the end of the stream. Thank you so much, Vera, for joining us. Next week, we're going to be live at Tabletop Scotland at a different time. 20:30, 8:30, we're going to be live from Tabletop Scotland with a great panel of RPG creators from there. Obviously, if you're watching this after on YouTube, hi, subscribe, like, share, and all of that, and you'll find us already from Tabletop Scotland in the next video along. Until then, thank you so much, Vera, for coming along. It was great to have you on, and you would be welcome back anytime.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been a total blast. I've had a lot of fun. Really interesting talks today. I appreciate you having me on. I look forward to the next time.
Yeah, you're awesome. And have you got anywhere that you would like people to go visit?
Yeah, I'm Vera Similia all over the place. I've got a fancy new model coming up. If you're into the VTuber things, I'm going to be streaming Metal Gear Solid in about 2 hours on my Twitch channel. Lots of stuff going on. Check out Open Fortress. Check out Love Web. Check out my things. Lots of cool stuff ahead.
Excellent. So thank you so much, everyone. All that remains to say is thank you to our patrons who keep our streams beautifully ad-free. We will see you next time for another Inside the Rookery. Until then, caw-caw, caw-caw. See you soon.